Hey, Stacey David here with Tales of a Gearhead podcast. This podcast is about all things automotive from any time, any place, and beyond. All right, let's get to it. All right, so I'm sitting watching TV this weekend, and the old John Cusack movie from the 80s, Better Off Dead, comes on. And man, I don't know if you've seen that movie or how long it's been, but you owe it to yourself to watch this for several reasons. Okay, it's an 80s teenage movie, you know, so it's got some goofy stuff. But there is some really good car stuff in this movie. And what it is it's like it was, those were the years that I was in high school, and it's exactly like it was. It's so accurate. He's got a 67 or 68 Camaro Rally Sport that he's working on. It's just sitting in the garage, and it is completely like you would have bought them back then. It's just an old car. And he's a skier, and it's got ski racks on it. And I saw that Camaro with ski racks on it. I was dying because that was my childhood, man. Everybody drove around with ski racks on their cars. You didn't think a thing about having a ski rack or some sort of bicycle rack or something on your muscle car or your Roadrunner or whatever. Those were just daily drivers. So to see this car with the big wide mags on the back and the ski racks on it, oh, it was hilarious, man. I just loved it. And I think it's unfortunate that we've gotten so far away where everybody is so into restoring these cars back original, you know, to where they're not. That's not how kids used them. You know, we used them, first of all, because they were cheap and because they were fun, and you street raced and you just had a good time with them. So it just reminded me that we have to kind of get back to that mentality of enjoying those cars. And it's a little bit the mentality that is in some of the Fast and Furious movies, especially the earlier ones. Now, the later ones have gotten crazy. It kind of reminded me of what it takes for a vehicle to become collectible. And I get that question a lot. We have that discussion all the time because people are always coming up going, man, what do you think is going to be the next collectible vehicle? Because they all want to invest in that car or that truck, and they want to have 5 of them sitting in their garage. So when they're worth zillions of dollars, they roll them out and they take them to the auction, which is, that's just not car guy mentality, man. That's collector mentality. We're getting mixed up on the passion that people have for cars. But one thing that I have found out for sure, you know, going right off like this movie, on how things are going to be collectible. You know, one thing that I have seen across the board is if it was popular at one time, it will have a resurgence. Because people in 10, 15 years, 20 years, they will want to go back to what they had a great memory with. So anything that was really hot at one time, whether it be a Rubik's Cube or G.I. Joe or the cars or whatever, it will have a resurgence, and people will go back and collect that stuff. Now, how long they collect it, how big the value will go up on them, nobody really knows. Prime example, my generation didn't really grow up with baseball cards like the earlier generations. Okay, there's baseball cards now that are hundreds of thousands of dollars, or used to be. But the value of baseball cards has dropped way down. But the values of Hot Wheels, which is more my generation stuff, there's Hot Wheels cars now that are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, when you think about that, it's like it was a dollar car that you could buy, and they're worth that kind of money. But how is that different than a stamp or a coin or a trading card, a baseball card that was popular to another generation? So it's that kind of thing. So any cars, you know, that were popular, your Camaros, Mustangs, things like that, those are always going to have a resurgence. Another thing is anything that serves a purpose, you know, that people can use so they can get a good use out of it, not just driving around. This is why all of your Broncos and your SUVs and your trucks and your wagons, that's why those are having a resurgence. Because first of all, we all grew up in that stuff. And second of all, you can use it. I mean, if you buy, you know, a classic Corvette, or you buy a classic Bronco, what are the uses? I mean, a Corvette, you can drive down the highway, and that's awesome. But a Bronco, you can drive down the highway, you can take it off-road, you can throw your dog in the back. I mean, there's three big things right there. So, the multi-use facet of them is a big thing. And that always adds a value to collectors. And I've seen a lot of these Broncos and Blazers and stuff. Man, they're going up for a time. And that's the other thing. You don't know how long that's going to last. But that's a good thing to kind of watch. Another aspect is if they're weird or odd. Now, I'm coming down the list here. Obviously, something that was popular before is the most sure. Then something that has multi-purpose use is, the second level. And then now we're getting into stuff that gets a little more variable, like something that's weird or odd. Just because you have something that's weird or odd doesn't mean it's going to be collectible. And some people think that. They're like, hey, man, I got a Yugo. It's going to be collectible because it was weird and odd. It's like, no, it's just junk. Nobody wants it. Let me crush it with my monster truck. So you have to be weird and odd is just something that people just kind of decide. Prime example, the Edsel always was never well received, always was kind of ugly. Well, the Edsel, you would think that's perfect ingredients for a car that would one day spring alive and become huge. Well, it never has. The Edsel still just kind of is that car. On the other hand, the DeLorean was never very popular when it came out, due in part to the movie Back to the Future. Obviously the DeLorean now has kind of become a semi-exotic. People actually want them. So there's no real rhyme or reason for that, but that is one aspect that kind of brings collectability. And then the last one, of course, is it just rare? Now, all of these things that I've said play off of the first one. So if they were collectible or desirable when they first came out, and they were odd or weird and rare, well, now a lot of times you've got something that is going to a real high value. So you see how these things kind of add on to each other to set the high collectability. For example, a Barracuda, a 70 Barracuda. That's a nice car. And you can pick them up fairly cheap. If you get a 70 Cuda, okay, that's a step up. That's a little more desirable. And it was a little more rare, and it was a little more weird. And then you have the Cuda, the 70 Cuda with a 440 six-pack. Well, now that's rare and that's desirable. And it was kind of weird and odd, and it keeps going up and up, and value goes up and up until you got the Hemi Cuda with the 4-speed, which is, there's just a few of them made. People didn't really want them. Superbird's a prime example of this. Those cars were so weird when they came out, most of them didn't sell for 3 or 4 years. They sat on the dealership lots. They were anomalies. It's like, what is that? And now they're one of the most collectible cars out there. So having said all of that, as you can see, there is one common thread that runs through all of this. It has to be something that people liked, and something that you had as a kid or that you saw in a movie and brings back those memories and that kind of thing. That's what will make something collectible. That's what will make something desirable. And that's what makes cars fun right now. So get out there and find yourself something that you can enjoy. I've got a question here that came in from Mac. And Mac says, hey, man, I'm trying to get into building cars. And I want to know, what are the tools and the skills that I have to have? Well, that's a loaded question, man, because you can't ever have too many tools, and you can't ever stop learning the skills. But there is a real answer to this, though. Basically, it's not as hard as a lot of people think. A lot of people think they need to start off with a whole shop and a garage full of stuff, and it's not that hard. Really, what you need as far as tools, you need basic tools. You need screwdrivers, you need wrenches, you need ratchets, sockets. You need the basic tools, because keep in mind, cars are nothing more than a big puzzle that needs to be put together and taken apart. Most of the time, you just need the tools to be able to do that. And a lot of times people think that they need to get into building a car, and that's not the right mentality to somebody that's just getting into it. When you're jumping into working on a car, basically you're a problem solver. So you're going to be taking off a bad part and replacing it with a good part. That's the majority of what the car thing is. That's not that hard. There's some special tools, for brakes and that kind of thing that you can pick up if you dig into that. But to start out, if you can take off a bolt and remove a piece and then put another piece back on and put the bolt back on, you're on your way. Now, there is a big difference between somebody who is just a parts replacer, that may be a restoration type of thing, and somebody that goes into a builder. Now, that's a completely different deal, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But going back to the original question, those are the type of tools you need, and the skills that you need, once again, are just basic mechanical skills. You need to understand kind of how brakes work and how steering geometry works and how automotive electric basically works. And as you start wiring up relays and doing things like that, you will learn more and more all the time. But you don't have to have all these degrees and all this stuff to start with. Now, keep in mind, that is for somebody that's doing just some fun restoration work in their garage. As you start stepping more into, a fabrication role or something, that's a different animal. So let's talk about that a little bit. Okay, so for your early skills and your early tools, you can see it's not that hard. Now, somewhere along the line, you're going to hit those epiphany moments. You're going to hit those epiphany tools that are going to kind of change your whole perspective. It's like when Keanu Reeves took the pill in The Matrix and all of a sudden, whoa! There are certain tools, there are certain projects that are going to do that for you. Prime example, as I said before, when you are like a restorer, you're using all of the basic hand tools, you're replacing alternators, you're even, maybe doing subframes, putting in engines, transmissions, that kind of thing. But one of those epiphany moments is when you build your first engine and you actually build something. In other words, you take out old parts and you don't just replace them with stock parts. You have the motor board and you have a different crank and you put that in there. Now you're creating something. You're not just restoring it. That's kind of an epiphany moment. You have now changed from a parts replacer and now you're adding a creative aspect to it. Paint is another thing like that. When you get into doing paint work, there is a style, there is a creativity, there is a understanding, there is a art to that. How much you mix it, how you do it, the finesse in sanding, all of that stuff are things that are learned. It's not just by the book. And so it starts to add that artistry that takes it away from just doing restoration style work. Another big one for me was when I got my first welder. Up until that time, you're kind of replacing things. A welder is one of those epiphany tools, to me it was anyway, where all of a sudden you can create stuff. It's like, oh, I can take those two pieces of metal and I'll just weld them together and I'll make a bracket. What? That is completely mind-boggling. It's like, I don't know how many of you out there are musicians, but if you're guitar players, which most people out there strum on a guitar, play it a little bit. This is an example. Most people, when they show you a guitar, they play vertically up the neck. They start on the low string, go to the high string. And when people talk to you about scales, that's how they work them. You work up and down the neck vertically. Well, an epiphany moment for me was when I realized that you could go horizontally up the neck. Now the whole neck becomes alive. You've got, 18 inches or more of fretboard that you were not even thinking about using. You were doing it all down there. You got octaves, you've got all kinds of stuff. And those epiphany sort of tools are that kind of thing, where you're like, oh my gosh, this opens up a whole nother world to me. Doing your own upholstery is the same thing. Once you take that material and you realize how that you can stretch it and stitch it and, put different things in it and add metal to it and all this kind of thing is another one of those. So I encourage you, branch out into these kind of things. Now, there's a lot of people that just like to stay in that comfort zone and just do restoration work. And I've got a lot of friends that have restoration shops, and that's all they do. They don't fabricate. They don't do anything. They just do restoration stuff, and there is nothing wrong with that. But if you're inclined to move on to the next level and learn more stuff and maybe add some more skills and tools, which I strongly suggest you do, then that's what you want to do. You want to keep pushing forward. You want to keep learning those things, and you'll be shocked on how easy it is to learn this stuff. But don't make the mistake of trying to do it all at the very beginning. Start easy, start slow, start simple. It's always funny to me to hear when people are talking about the new small cars. It's funny because the automotive world goes in these cycles. And it's like the vehicles get bigger and bigger and bigger until they're huge. And then all of a sudden everybody goes, oh, we need small cars. And then they get tiny. And then they start getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it just keeps going over and over again. And the funny thing is, I just picked up a car the other day. I traded for it. And it's kind of at the beginning of that first small car madness. And this was in the early 50s. What I've got is a Henry J. I've got a 53 Henry J here. And we just look at it. It just makes me smile. Because now, first of all, this car is all original. And it is probably one of the most unattractive cars ever built in the 50s era. And it's tiny compared to, keep in mind in the early 50s, cars were big and they were getting bigger. The 59 Cadillac, the cars were massive. But in 1950, Henry J. Kaiser of Kaiser Corporation, decided that he was going to do a small car. Now, keep in mind, they were doing stuff with Jeep. And so they went into this small sedan thing, and he came out with this cute little sedan because he thought people just wanted a small little basic transportation car. And that was the Henry J. And, initially it took off pretty well. And then they only made the thing for 3 years, 50 through 53, really. It went through 54, but those were kind of just leftover 53s. So it's officially about a 3-year deal. Give it 4 just to be nice. But there toward the end, man, people just didn't want them. They just didn't want those small cars. And, any respecting hot rodder kid, you didn't want to be seen in a Henry J. And that's interesting because a few years later, the Henry J took on a whole different attitude. I'll talk about that in a minute. But one of the unique things about the Henry J, first of all, it was named right after Henry Kaiser. So it was kind of like his namesake. And, it didn't do much for that. It was kind of a cool little car in the fact that it had a little fastback design. It had little fins on the back. And, they had some styling to it. It wasn't just a little cracker box. It looked like a typical 50s car, just small. And had a full back seat, so it wasn't just a 2-seater. But it was the first time America really started to get sporty. And, of course, other cars did it better than the Henry J. But one of the unique things about it is that they worked out a deal with Sears to where you could buy a Henry J out of the Sears catalog. So it became known as the Sears car, the Allstate. And so that didn't help the reputation of the car at all. They came originally with a 4-cylinder, flathead 4-cylinder, and then you could get them later on with a 6. The one I've got's got the 6-cylinder in it. It had a really embarrassing kind of beginning, and then in the 60s, when the gasser thing took off and people started racing Willys and everything, and the search was on to get a lightweight car that had a full frame under it that you could turn into a drag racer, and the Henry J as a gasser was born. And I guarantee if you have not seen a Henry J as a gasser, you just don't realize you saw one, because if you Google it, you'll see a picture of one and you'll go, oh my gosh, that's a Henry J. You know, with the nose up in the air, blower sticking out of the hood, a tube axle in the front, and big slicks, radius rear wheel wells. The Henry J with those little fins is one of the coolest hot rods that you could see. And done as a gasser, they're just great. And so it was kind of funny that the car that started out as an embarrassing putt-putt, nobody wants it car, ended up becoming one of the most sought-after gasser bodies, probably second only to the Willys bodies. Always an interesting car, and I always loved them. First one I ever saw, I was right out of high school, and I'm driving around, and I'm looking at cars in people's yards, and here sits one, and it's all done up gasser style, and I'd never seen anything like that. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I pull in there, and the guy goes, yeah, it's got a 427. And I'm like, what? It didn't have anything sticking out of the hood. No, actually, it had a carburetor sticking out of the hood. It wasn't blown. But he had this massive 427 in there, and oh my gosh, I wanted a car so bad. And he had it for sale. I think he was asking a lot of money for it. I think he was asking $2,000 for it. That makes me sick, to think about it. There's no rust, but it was just, this was a long time ago. That was what they went for with that engine in there. And I never forgot. Of course, it would have been a horrible daily driver, but man, I didn't care about that. So I've always liked them. So I picked this one up, and I'm not sure what to do with it now, because this car is all original and it has some really rare parts on it. It was actually restored original about 20 years ago, and now it has fallen into disarray. So it needs to either be restored again or taken a different direction. Now, of course, I'm a hot rod guy, so I got it with the intention of making a killer gasser out of it. But now I'm looking at it, there's guys that want these cars, all original, because they're really rare. Because you just don't find them, in original condition, not all cut up. So I don't know what I'm going to do. What do you guys think I ought to do? You're going to have to talk a lot for me not to cut it up, because I've always loved them that way. But it's cool either way. It's fun to look at it and kind of see what people were doing back then in the first run of the little cars. All right, the next question comes from Andy. Andy says, hey man, I recently stumbled on your heavy metal project. I see that it's not finished yet. Is there any plans to pick it up and finish it up? If so, when? Well, Andy, yeah, absolutely. I was actually working on heavy metal just the other day. It, like a lot of things, kind of got sidelined during the whole COVID mess. So we're back on it, and I actually plan on doing some updates on it sometime this season. For those of you that don't know, that's a tow truck, an old international tow truck. We slapped a Duramax diesel in and did all kinds of crazy stuff too. So one of my favorite projects, and I know a lot of you guys are out there waiting to see it done. So yes, it will be back, and you'll be seeing it soon. All right, that's our show for today, which means you need to get out there and start working on something. Spend some time turning wrenches. You'll love it. Also, make sure to check out our website, staceydavid.com. We got all kinds of new products, some great stuff there you're going to love. Also, make sure you check out our social media. That's Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, all at Official Stacey David. Our social media is where you're going to find all the bonus content, the giveaways, the contests, the trivia. We even have extra viewer projects that we show everybody to focus on what you're working on. YouTube is where you're going to be able to find all of our episodes of Gears, past, present, and future. I know a lot of you guys ask about that. That's where you can see them. All right, that's all we got. We'll see you next time.